what about the wars and climate change? The Bible speaks about these things happening, and it's happening right before our very eyes. Wouldn't you agree that we're living in the last days? So what do you guys think about that? Lots of bad stuff happening in the world. The WMS says this indicates the end of the world is near. You know, how could that possibly not be true? Just look at how terrible things are. What would you guys say to that?
Yes. Like literally, yes. Well, next. Well, I mean,
yeah. Yeah,
the Church
right.
of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and Shincheonji and the Jehovah's Witnesses with all their predictions of Armageddon. You think you're the only guys, you know, coming up with this? Every cult does this. That's how they sell it. Right?
Yeah.
And
of course, yeah.
The number one. Well, what did Jesus say is the number one sign of the end of the age? Matthew 24, when all the discourse, they said, "What shall be the sign of your coming, the sign of the end of your age?" The first thing out of his mouth will be, "Take heed that no man deceives you." Then he goes on and talks about wars, rumors, wars. He comes back again, talking about false Christ and those who deceive. Then he goes off and talks about, you know, brother shall wax brother. Then he comes back a third time. So he mentions it 3 times, and it's the first thing out of his mouth when they ask the sign at the end. So I say there's a mountain of evidence against the World Mission Society Church of God for those who really want to look and to know. We're supposed to test the prophets. You know, Jesus said, Matthew 24:24, for false Christs and false prophets will arise and show great signs and wonders as to mislead, if possible, the very elect. I mean, deception by nature is very hard to tell. And there's such a mountain of evidence for the honest person who really wants to, you know, test. It's not what your missionary or deacon or overseer tell you. It's between you and God. And if you're going to get on your knees in your prayer closet and look at a group who has twisted the Bible, who's made false prophecies, 1988, 1999, 2012, who's going to take out chapters out of books. You make you give back your books as they change the books. They lead you to worship false gods. Make changes in your histories, rewriting the history of everything. You're changing your beliefs, twisting scripture. There's an incredibly huge mountain of evidence. If one of those things were true, then the World Mission Society Church of God would be a false cult. But when you put them all together, it's such a mountain, and it's all available out there. Choose wisely. You know, take a step back, take a look at this. Look at the evidence. You know, if you saw another religion making false prophecies that didn't come to pass, would you want to do it? If you saw another religion doctoring the books, would you tell your friend, would he be smart to stay in that group, or would he want to turn tail and run? So basically, there's just such a mountain of evidence. Yeah, all these groups say it in the last days.
Yeah,
you know. But
I just wanted to pull up. Michelle said bad things have been happening forever. Why didn't the world end after World War II? Then bad things will continue to happen. It means nothing. Just fear mongering.
That's pretty false, Michelle. War did not start happening until recently. Wars never existed before. This is when the world is created.
It's a novel experience.
It's new. Nobody knows what's going on. Wars never happened. There's never been natural disasters. There's never been a shift of the climate. Ice ages never existed. You know, things like it. It's just. These things historically have happened. And now the only difference is that there are bigger, badder weapons, and we have the means as a society to be able to go internationally and fight on a larger scale. But this has always been the way of the world. You know, it's never been any different. And she said it right. It's fear mongering. Every single time that there's anything in the news, it's, Father's so close. And I've heard several different explanations of where the end of the world is supposed to begin. They said it was, I heard Father said the United Nations is supposed to keep peace, but it's actually going to be where World War III begins. I've heard it's going to start from North Korea. That time that Kim Jong-un walked over to South Korea with the South Korean president a few years back, they said, "Oh, it's a prophecy. You know, the lion from the north or whatever came down to the south." They created this thing about North Korea. It's supposed to begin in North Korea. And then they also said it's supposed to happen from the Middle East. So, I mean, they keep creating all these different I'm sure something has to stick, but they never mentioned Russia. They never mentioned these different things that are going on right now. But ultimately, they just keep on playing the guessing game, and they keep on coming up short every single time they make a prediction of where these final wars are supposed to be initiated from. So, it's just
and I would just say, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say, like, you guys were around in 2012, so tell us what happened. That you were a deacon, right? And what happened in 2012 for you guys when you were in the church? Like 88, they said the world's going to end, right? And then in 99, and then were you maybe some of these people in the chat room weren't members around in 2012, but you guys were. Edgar, you were a member in 2012, right? So were you actually hearing about Father's footsteps being right there? That this is the last Passover, that it's time to stop preaching, all this stuff. I mean, 2012, what did you experience for the listeners?
I have it written down in one of my agendas that I kept from 2012, literally the day they told us it was supposed to be over with, and nothing happened. I mean, I remember we collected candles, canned food, water. I remember they made a big deal. Oh, shout out to Missionary Michael and Pastor Daniel Park, by the way, because they're the ones who I heard it from, that preparing for the end of the world and all kinds of stuff. Like, it's been the same thing. Like they always tell you, the world's going to end and you need to prepare. We can hear Father's footsteps around the corner. This is going to be the last Passover. This is the last feast, the Day of Atonement. You need to prepare. I remember one time Missionary Michael here in Wichita, Kansas in 2015, when they were saying it was the year of Jubilee, he rose his right hand during a sermon. And he said, if the mighty angel raises her right hand and says that there's no more delay, I raise my right hand and say there's no more delay. And it's like, wait, how many years has it been since 2015? And it's every year. Like Anthony said, hearing Anthony say those different things, like when the North Korean president walked into the middle of the zone between North Korea and South Korea, there are so many little things that just came into my mind. Like they piggybacked at him for everything. The Donald Trump, they took a little clip of Donald Trump saying, I think it was in 2018.
Peace and safety.
Peace and safety. And they broadcasted that, like they were like sparing it throughout the Zions. Like, look, they took a verse, I think it's in Thessalonians, where it says,
when people are saying peace and safety, sudden destruction will come upon them like labor pains upon a pregnant woman.
Yeah. And they emphasize it's going to happen. If you heard the words, he said it right now, then what does that mean? Destruction should come upon us suddenly. Well, how long has it been since 2018? And it's, like this every year. Every year is the same thing, and it's just a bunch of nonsense.
Yeah. So the WMSCOG has made multiple failed prophecies. Multiple. I mean, they do it. It's just their go-to. So why put any stock into what they have said when they've already repeatedly shown themselves to be false prophets? So to any member out there, to this member who we're specifically addressing their question, why are you worried about the WMSCOG and the fear they're trying to instill in you about the end of the world coming soon? Why are you taking anything they are saying as having any value when they've shown themselves over and over and over again to be completely 100% unreliable? Go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, there's two things I wanted to mention actually from hearing from a member who recently left that they were proclaiming last year to be the last year as well, that they're like, oh, mother said that she's tired of this earth and she wants to go home and that this will be the year. So they say that usually early on in the year, so that the whole year you work really, really hard, that you give up and you sacrifice more and more and more. And then at the end, it was
it's a good strategy.
We're not ready. We're just not ready yet. So more time, more delay.
And then they go to the new song book and take out the hymn, which says, mother's going to send 144,000 because, maybe we can buy a little more time. But I mean, what does the Bible, Jordan, say about false prophets? Deuteronomy 18. You know, you should
that was the
hear
next
them.
point I wanted to make, was that a current prophecy that they had, and now they're backtracking from. It was during the last disaster. When the last disaster comes, they said that it's either going to be through nuclear disaster, World War III, or as on put it, God's mighty power. Like, you know, whether it be a solar flare, something with fire, something fiery is going to happen upon the earth. And then at that moment, everyone will die except 144,000 and, you know, God the Mother. They're all going to transform right before they are hit by the disaster, and then they're all going to fly up to heaven. And they said that she will be alive during that time. She will not die until then. They said the only reason why the church can overcome Satan is while God is in the flesh. So now these sorts of teachings that they have as to why she needs to be here, why she has to stay alive, and why she's going to be here during the last day, they're starting to change it. They're trying to backtrack it. They're trying to get rid of this. So now if you talk to members, they've already started to instill this in their mind so that when the day comes that she dies, that they're not just going to leave and the church is going to be empty. They're already trying to condition them to expect her to die. So, you know, it's just a change of the doctrine that's happening right now. From Edgar, I'm sure you remember that being the teaching from 2012 and a bit onward. And now they're starting to backtrack it. And that's why they also removed those sorts of references from the New Song books. And that's why they had them all burned.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to point out too that as an evangelical Christian, for the entire almost, I'll be 35 in April, 35 years of my life, I have heard over and over and over again from evangelical Christians that the world is about to end. And I have been pointed to, not necessarily by people immediately close to me or my pastor necessarily, although at times those things have happened as well. But people have consistently within evangelicalism claimed that the end of the world is coming, and they've pointed to all these different events in the news, these different catastrophes or wars or whatever is happening. When 9/11 happened, people thought the world was about to end. And so it's just a very subjective thing. I think humans and particularly people in certain religious strains are prone to kind of fall into this sensationalism. It gets people's attention. You start mentioning the end of the world and pointing to all the terrible things around you, you'll get people's attention, and you'll sell books, and you'll sell podcasts, and you'll get attention, and you'll get money. And so this is nothing. The WMS is doing nothing different than what all these other false groups do. There's false prophets in the evangelical church who have also made. Well, I don't know if it's fair to say they're in the evangelical church, but there have been. There certainly have been. I don't have names. I'm sure you could think of those who. There's blood moons and there's I haven't gotten into it deep enough to even remember the specific names of people, but all that just to say that this is not abnormal. This is something that many different, all cults, pretty much will do this. And so I would just say, to the members who have this question as one of the reasons they're staying in the WMS, I would just encourage you to ask the question, why do you think it is, whether you're in the World Mission Society or you're in Shincheonji or in some other group, and you're thinking, man, if I step out the door, the end of the world might come and terrible things might happen to me. I'm encouraging you to step back and ask the question, why do you think it is maybe that they have instilled that fear in you? And I would say, look at what look at the effect it's having on you right now. This person who sent this emailed us this question. Look at the effect it is having right now on this person. What's it doing? He literally told us in this email, these questions are the reason I'm not leaving the WMSCOG. What is one of those questions? Well, what if I leave and the end of the world happens and all hell breaks loose in my life and horrible, terrible, tragic things happen to me? Why do you think the WMSCOG instilled that in you? Well, maybe because it's a good tool to keep you inside the WMSCOG. Maybe because it's a great way to keep control of you and for them to just have their way with you. And look at it. It's working, right? It's causing you to be afraid to step out the door. And I would just say, look at Edgar. Look at Anthony. Look at Michelle Colon in the comments, and Odalis, who's also in the comments. Chrissy and Jorina, very many former members who have stepped outside the door. And you know what? Hailstones of fire have not fallen out of heaven. Plagues of locusts and darkness and all the rest. None of that's happened. They're fine. They're living their lives, and they're much happier. And so I'm just, this is a cult tactic, a textbook cult tactic of control to instill phobias and irrational fears inside of your mind, so that it's like this chain that hooks into your brain, so that anytime you want to walk out the door, you can't, because it's like it grabs you. It's like, oh wait, well, what if? That is cult indoctrination at work in your life. And so I would just say, as a member, there's nothing locking that chain. There's no lock on that chain. There's no bolt lock. You don't even need a key. All you need is to recognize it's there. The only thing that keeps that chain being effective in your life is you not realizing that chain is there in the first place. You think that's something else, something legitimate to actually consider and submit yourself to. If you'll just stop and realize, oh, wait a minute, that's just a stupid cult chain that they put in my brain when I wasn't looking, and say, okay, well, let's get rid of that. I don't need that. Obviously, the world's not going to end. Everybody's saying it's going to, and it hasn't. The WMS said it was going to 1,000 times, and they continue to. And guess what, guys? The world's not ending. I guarantee you, it's not ending. It's not going to end anytime soon. And all the diseases and the wars and the natural disasters, guys, that's been happening for the entirety of human history. And I would say, rather than things getting worse, just sit down and study history for a while. Compare the 21st century to even 200 years ago, and what you're going to discover is that actually the world has gotten quite a bit better. Western civilization and the impact really of what Christianity did in spreading throughout the world and being really the foundation of Western civilization in many respects. Things have gotten better over time for humanity. You think about medical and we have electricity and we have a culture with all its issues that assumes things like intrinsic human value and all the rest. We have ways of counteracting viruses that we didn't have 200 years ago. And so I just think there's so much just nonsense manipulation that goes into all this, that I would just say it's just this chain that has no power, that I think if you just recognize that you don't have to leave that thing attached to your brain anymore, because there's just nothing to it. It's all just lies.
The other end of that chain. There's nothing on the other end of the chain.
Right.
Just like dragging it around.
Absolutely.
Real quick, I want to mention, the question was, what about wars, climate change? Wouldn't we agree we're living in the last days? That, like Jordan said, that's exactly what they prey on. Is they use verses that are talking about last days, and that's one of the reasons why I mentioned Hebrews chapter 1.
Mm-hmm.
But can we just go to a couple verses? We don't have no explanation.
Yeah.
I just want to read them real quick, just for the sake of the members. Acts chapter 2, verse 14.
Yeah, I think this is a good direction to go, Edgar. Just kind of even taking the boogeyman out of that phrase, the last days, because really the cults like the WMS, they insert like a boogeyman mentality anytime you see the word the last days. And I think if you look at that phrase and keep it in context and discover its actual meaning in many of these passages that they use, you'll realize once again, as Steve said, that they've put chains on you that are attached to nothing. It's just this. So what was that passage again, Edgar? Sorry.
It's
Hebrews
Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2, verse 14. And it says, "Then Peter stood up with the 11, raised his voice, and addressed the crowd, 'Fellow Jews and all you who live in Jerusalem, let me explain this to you. Listen carefully to what I say. These people are not drunk as you suppose. It's only 9 in the morning. No, this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel. In the last days, God says, I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions. Your old men will dream dreams. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days, and they will prophesy.'" And then let's also 1 Peter chapter 1. 1 Peter chapter 1.
We've been in the last days for 2,000 years.
And it says in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 19, it says, "But with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect, he was chosen before the creation of the world, but was revealed in these last times." What it says, "In these last times for your sake." So these are just a few. There's also 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1 through 9, 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 3 through 5, and James chapter 5, verse 1 through 6. But essentially, apart from all those verses, Jesus says in Matthew chapter 24, verse 36, that it's really none of our business to worry about that time and the day. And that's exactly what they do. See, the last days, we've been, like you guys have been saying, we've been living in the last days. Last days represents the time of, from the time in between the first coming of Christ to the second coming of Christ. So we've been in that time. But Jesus says, don't focus on it. And it's funny to me, the World Mission Society Church of God, they love to, tell you we're living in the last days. We follow the Bible 100%. We're the only church that follows the Bible. And like Steve says, in Matthew chapter 24, literally the very first thing Jesus tells you to watch out for is to not be deceived by these false prophets. And look at even one of the characteristics. He says, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, right? So when you look at verses like that, it answers the question that this member is asking. What about this? What about that? Jesus says, what about it? Such things must happen. That's not new. It hasn't been new. It's not going to be. It's been around. It's the same thing over and over. That's not but that's not what God wants us to focus on.
It's very sobering. No, it's like they would say the last days started with the 37 years of Ahnsahnghong he had to fulfill in 1948, and then till his ministry ended in 1985. So basically, the last days started with when he was revealed, starting the 37 years, right? So it's like, no, guys, it started clearly. Look how it's used biblically. They're trying to create this kind of hype, this intensity of like, you got to go work, and it's everything's going to come to burning end. No, the last days biblically, like Edgar just showed in several places, started a few thousand years ago, not down to 1948.
Yeah. And it's interesting how Jesus specifically says, do not be alarmed. And the WMS thrives. They literally thrive off of causing members to be in a constant state of alarm. Like that's how they get their money. That's how they get their tithes, because they instill these irrational fears of the end of the world coming, so that members are constantly alarmed about what's to come, so that they'll do anything. They'll give up anything. They'll give up any relationship. They'll give up any amount of money, any job, anything, because of the alarm that has been so deeply instilled into their minds. And it's really just, it's criminal.
Fear.
It's evil. It's
bite model stuff, Jordan. It's total bite model stuff.
Yes, it's bite model stuff. Absolutely. And I would just, again, recommend to a member to go look at Steve Hassan's, a former Unification Church cult member who came out, experienced many of the same things that you guys as WMS members are experiencing, but developed a model called the bite model to kind of define high control groups tactics to brainwash and to basically have undue influence influence, like wrong, immoral levels of influence in a person's life through just manipulation and deception. And so just one last thing, because Edgar, you mentioned Matthew 24, and this is a story for another day. But this is just something I always like to point out when we're in discussion of the last days, and the WMS and all these other cults will point to all the terrible things that are happening. And oh, look, this is just like Jesus said in Matthew 24, all these terrible things would happen. And look, now it's happening. It must be the end being near, but just something to chew on. And I don't know even everybody on this panel if we fully agree on all elements of eschatology. I know me and Edgar, I think are, would have fun discussing this at one point. Hopefully we can. But anyways, Jesus says in Matthew 24:34, after having described the wars, the rumors of wars, and everything that's going to happen, he says, truly, I tell you, this generation, what generation? Well, the generation he was talking to, I think, is the obvious immediate way to take what he just said. This generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. And so just to say, I think that in itself gives at least some grounding to maybe look at this and ask some questions about it. What did Jesus mean by that? If Jesus said this generation would see all these things come to pass, what does that mean? What is he talking about? Is he talking about the end of the world? Or perhaps he's talking about the actual destruction that came upon Jerusalem in 70 AD. If you think about Jesus was acting as, in the same kind of role as the apocalyptic, prophets of old, Jeremiah and Ezekiel, who would prophesy to the people of God about the coming judgment because of their sin. Now, Jesus was walking in that role. And if you look at the language, the metaphors, the way that the prophets would describe in sort of this exaggerated, hyperbolic language to describe the devastating judgment that was going to come, Jesus and Revelation too draws very, very closely from so many of those things. And so what I'm suggesting here is just my personal view that these are not things, at least in the context of Matthew 24, these are not things that are going to happen at the quote unquote end of the world, like the end of all things. But as we've already talked about, I think Jesus was talking about what was going to happen at the end of the old covenant age, where God would come and he would, because of the rejection of Jesus, the rejection of the Messiah, of Israel, how they rejected their own Messiah, they stoned the prophets. The parable that talks about how this king invited them to the banquet, and he sent his servants and they killed his servants. And he said, okay, well, I'll send my sons. Surely they'll receive my son. What did they do? They killed his son too. And they did not accept that invitation. So what did the parable go on to say? Said, well, what's that king going to do? Well, he's going to destroy them, right? He's going to come and destroy them. I think that's a parable of what happened in actual history to Israel. They killed their Messiah. They rejected the prophets. And so judgment came, just as it did over and over and over again, all throughout the Old Testament. And so I would just say that's something worth, if you're interested in maybe digging into some of this. We've already kind of established here that every time the Bible references the last days, it doesn't, I would say even rarely is actually referencing the end of the world, quote unquote, but very often it's speaking of the end of an age, like the end of a specific period in God's, history of his working with humanity. And so I think, when Jesus says this generation will not pass away until all these things take place, it's worth considering, why did he say that? And did that actually happen? Well, did that generation see everything that happened?
Theologically, it's basically the idea what Paul would talk about, this present age and the age to come. And the age to come is invading the present age, and all that's happening through the ministry of Christ. So, this is the concept of being in the last days. It's like the whole consummation initiated by Christ in the age to come is invading human history and is already taking place now. It's not fulfilled. We call it in theology the already not yet. It's already here, but it's not yet fulfilled. Just like our salvation is, we're saved now. We can have a knowledge of salvation, not like the WMS says. We have to fear that we could lose our salvation any second, but we can have a assurance of our salvation, but we're already saved, but not yet saved. And it's that whole tension between the two ages that Paul refers to multiple times, this age and the age to come, and that's the last days.